So first of all, thank you very much for inviting me to speak today. And I'm sorry I can't be there in person, but I already have a trip where I'm going to France in 10 days and going to Italy in another month. So it would have been one too many trips to Europe for right now. But thank you very much for this invitation. And I will just go ahead and talk a little bit about AI and AI ethics and Christianity. So let's see, here we go. All right, so first question is, what is technology? And technology really has two senses that you can think of it. You can think of it in terms of technological products, which is what we think about when we think about our computer mouse or a pen or anything like that. But it's also know-how and really thinking about the skills and other sorts of rational production techniques that we have embedded into our society and technology. So techne, of course, comes from Greek for artisanal craft knowledge and skill. It's basically rational production, and technology, of course, is a very modern world, and it means the study of rational production. Now, when we talk about science and technology, it's important to realize that science and technology are quite different from each other. Science aligns the human mind with the natural world. Technology aligns the natural world with the human mind. Or, to phrase it a different way, science studies things that already exist, and technology creates things that have never been. And in some ways, they're reciprocal opposites from each other. And it allows this kind of ratcheting technique where we study the world, then we create technology on top of that, which allows us to study the world a little bit more, and on and on and on. And this is a relatively recent human realization. We're talking, the last few centuries. For a long time, nobody ever recognized that there was a connection between science and technology. And for that matter, they didn't even have a notion that society progressed, right? They didn't have this notion of technological progress or scientific progress. All right, so what I will do now is I'll go through historically, theologically, anthropology, ethically, what is technology for? And that'll give us some indication, of course, of what AI is for. All right, so historically, Christianity has been very technology friendly. You can go all the way back to St. Augustine in the 5th century. He was the first person to really, that we know of, to have recorded the existence of technological progress. And you can find that in the City of God, chapter 24. He says this is an expression of divine providence that technology is progressing in this way. And we can see some other examples of this, how Christianity relates to technology, just by looking at France and England between 1100 and 1350. So, for example, in France, in the 12th century, there was a Bridge-Building Brotherhood. They built various bridges, and the reason they did that is because they saw technology in the form of bridge building as being an excellent way to help pilgrims get from place to place, or to help transportation in other senses and really bring places together and kind of unite. And they had some innovative flat arches. So up until this point, arches have been much more semicircular, and they also put cutwaters on both sides of the piers of the bridge, which was also an innovation. Before that point, they hadn't done that. And of course, the person who founded it said that these all came to him in a dream, which he believed was divine inspiration. You can take that as you will. So St. Albert the Great, known as a Doctor Universalis, he had some pretty exciting things that he did. So he studied zoology, optics. He discovered the element arsenic. Worked in many other fields. He's also reputed to have produced a talking brazen head, which is something that people had back in the Middle Ages. They like to create these sorts of things. And so if you look up, the word android in various sorts of encyclopedias, this one from 1728, they credit him as being the developer of that. All right, Roger Bacon, back in the 1200s, known as Dr. Mirabilis, advocate of observation and experimentation. So many people consider him to be kind of a proto-scientist. He also had a background in alchemy and astronomy, optics. He determined that the speed of light is faster than the speed of sound. And he determined that by watching a blacksmith working from, a hillside outside of town. And he recognized that he could see the hammer strike before the sound got to him. And therefore something interesting was happening there. He was also the first European known to describe gunpowder. All right, another example, the Oxford and Merton calculators between 1325 and about 1350. These guys, one of whom was known as the Doctor Profundus and another as the calculator, they began mathematizing physics, and they discovered such things as the mean speed theorem. So this was actually an important discovery that math could be applied to nature. This mathematization of physics, of course, becomes a pretty big deal pretty quickly. All right, so what is the purpose of technology? Historically, it's to facilitate our adaptation to a changing environment. Of course, how did this come to be? There are actually some theological reasons for them. Excuse me. So throughout history, religion and technology have generally cooperated and enhanced each other. For example, going back to megalithic stone structures, pyramids, cathedrals, printing presses, even the invention of hypertext. Hypertext was actually invented because there was a Jesuit priest who wanted to hyperlink all the links inside of St. Thomas Aquinas' Summa Theologia. And he went to the CEO of IBM, Thomas Watson, and said, hey, can you help me do this? And so they invented hypertext. So the Bible and technology, the Bible begins in a garden and it ends in a flying heavenly cubic city, which is kind of an interesting transition. This seems to have to express some sort of blessing on technological advance, or at least it's okay. The Bible also begins in watery chaos, and it ends with the sea was no more. In other words, chaos is completely eliminated. So what are Adam and Eve doing when they're in the garden? They are to till and keep the garden. Do they use tools? Well, it's probably a lot better than using your fingers and fingernails to claw at the soil. But they disobey. When they disobey, of course, they make primitive leaf clothing. But when they're thrown out, God gifts them higher technology, which is kind of interesting, this animal skin clothing as they are thrown out. So that's kind of an interesting indication of technology right there. All right, so of course, the flood happens a few chapters later. Noah's Ark is a giant technological artifact, instructed by God and constructed by humans, and it has a salvific component to it, right? It's saving humanity, saving the world through technology. And it also shows that technology is in opposition to the powers of chaos. So once again, you can look at something like the Tower of Babel narrative. Humans use technology to compete with God, and they get punished with this. So there obviously is also a negative component to technology. It can be used wrongly. But the positive depictions of artifacts are actually much more common in the Bible. And for example, you can look at all of the holy artifacts that exist as described in Exodus, or when describing Solomon's temple. I mean, think about the book of Exodus. 1/4 of the book of Exodus is describing the tabernacle and the vestment and the Ark of the Covenant. It's describing technological artifacts in detail and how they're supposed to be constructed. And I don't think we should ignore that. An entire quarter of the book is dedicated to that. It must be important. So depictions of God as an artificer show up throughout the Bible. The fact that Jesus is a carpenter is also pretty significant. They serve to reinforce this idea of techne is not just a good activity, but it's also a divine activity in many ways. Of course, there's Jesus as a carpenter, and this is a pretty old depiction of Jesus as being kind of the divine geometer and measuring out the world. So, Bible and technology, just a few more quotes from that. You shall know them by their fruits. True prophets are going to produce good actions in the world. And of course, if technology aids that, then all the better. Behold, I make all things new. That's a blessing on novelty, which is, of course, crucial to invention. This helps develop the idea of progress over time, right? New things happen, things change in the world. More examples. So, for example, go and do likewise, promoting imitation of Jesus's miracles. And very truly, I tell you, the one who believes in me will do these works that I do, and in fact do greater works than these, which is an exhortation to great works. And of course, the question is, how do we do great things today? Well, very often we do them through technology. So Norman Borlaug is a person who I like to bring up constantly. Norman Borlaug is the person who basically, he was an agronomist. He was also a Lutheran in the United States. He discovered how to greatly increase grain production. He's credited with saving, in an ongoing way, 1 billion or more lives. He developed the kind of crops that we all use today. He figured out what the trick was to make it happen. So in his 1970 Nobel Prize, Peace Prize acceptance speech, he cited the Bible 5 times, and he utilized biblical ideas and language throughout. And you can really think of him as multiplying food to the next level, right? This is not just feeding 5,000, this is feeding billions. So the purpose of technology, theologically speaking, is to facilitate human adaptation to a changing environment. You can go through Exodus, Genesis, whether it's expulsion from the garden or Noah's Ark or new religious obligations, or the very kind of technologically artifact-centered religion of the Old Testament. And the New Testament is rebuilding the world with Jesus as a carpenter. And this all has a moral flavor to it as well. This technology is never depicted as being morally neutral. It always has a good or a bad component to it. So ultimately, the purpose of technology is to adapt us towards good, not evil, and ultimately to make ourselves fit to live with God. AI can also help us to express the image of God in us if we use, AI to fulfill God's mission for humankind. And what are the good things that AI can do? It can do a lot of things: medical research, climate modeling, weather modeling, et cetera, et cetera. I won't go through everything on this list. So theology to anthropology, theologically speaking, humans are important. We know this because God chose to incarnate as one of us. Therefore, our embodiment, our psychology, our purpose, and our finitude are all capable of fulfilling God's hopes for us. So let's talk about anthropology a little bit. AI raises for humanity the question of what makes us unique, and if our intelligence can be externalized and improved upon if AI does that. What makes us unique if we can take all these unique parts of us and externalize them? And if all of our intelligence is externalized, then what remains? What's left of us? So computers can beat us at chess, Go, they handle data better, they're faster for cyber defense. Computers can really optimize for almost any task better than humans can. What's really left for humans, I would say, is love. Our work is to love more than to think analytically. Thinking exists, I would say, in order to serve love. God is love. God is also logos at the same time, which is, I think, a really interesting thing that the Bible equates both of those with each other. AI is not love, and AI is also not logos, I would say. And AI is also really not even I as an intelligence. It's not an intelligent thing in itself. It's an externalized form of human intelligence, really an automated form of human intelligence. So true intelligence would be the kind that humans share with God. It implies freedom and will. Computers don't have freedom and they don't have will. There are ways that you can make them simulate that in certain ways, but it's really not the same thing. And once again, God's love is logic and God's logic is love. This also gets into the idea of finitude. For sinful creatures, finitude is good, which is something that I think we should remember here. And as we're transitioning to a more ethical way of thinking about this, this is, I think, kind of important to keep in mind. There are, various places in the Bible where it says, "Be holy as God is holy," or "Be perfect as God is perfect." And if we're not, we're going to end up being dead as sin is dead. And this is an important kind of contrast that's laid out in front of us. And so I think we should think to ourselves that God's finitude is actually a blessing. God made us weak and finite in order to protect ourselves from sin. The more powerful we become, the more destructive our sins become, both individually and collectively, of course, until eventually we strike disaster and we end up weakening ourselves. We disempower ourselves when we hit these sorts of catastrophic disasters. And then we can't do that again until we recover to a similar level of power and hopefully become smarter the next time. What do we need to do then? We need to really turn to God and to seek holiness. So what's the relationship between purpose and power? Our purpose in creation requires a certain amount of power, technological power. Caring for each other requires construction, food, medical technology, transportation, and communication technology. Worshiping God actually requires a lot of technology, if you want to think about it that way. Construction, textiles, metallurgy, glass, writing, all these things which show up not only in Exodus, but all the way until now. Caring for nature involves transportation, environmental science, computer modeling, economics, satellites, rocketry, all these sorts of things that we use, to put a satellite in orbit so that we can tell what's going on with the environment on Earth, to track deforestation or climate change or these sorts of things. So just to sum these things up, what's our purpose that we're doing? What are we here for? We are to keep and to till the garden. We're to love God and neighbor, and we're also called to be like God. And this gets us now into the question of ethics. So every technology has a built-in purpose to it. It's always know-how for something. There is a reason that people create technologies, and those reasons can be good or bad. The purposes can be good, evil, they can be mixed, neutral, or ambiguous. And technologies are really imbued with human purposes and direct us towards particular goals by making those goals easier or more efficient. What are some examples of this? So greatly expanded food production helps to feed the hungry. Antibiotics helps to heal the sick. Mass production of clothing helps to clothe the needy. Aqueducts help to bring water to the thirsty, if you want to think about all these kind of works of mercy. And of course, then there are also very horrible things that technology can do. Weapons of mass destruction make killing very efficient. And so we have to recognize once again that technology always has this moral character to it. So the purpose of technology, once again, the purpose of technology is to help adapt humanity towards its changing environment by facilitating good actions and impeding evil actions. That is kind of the final moral quality to it. Morality takes priority over technology. Technology should help us to become better people here on Earth and ultimately more fit for heaven. And just as an example of somebody that I like to bring up, a little known figure in medieval history, Raymond Lull. He was from Spain, from the island of Majorca in the late 1200s, early 1300s. He wanted to evangelize folks in North Africa. When he went to North Africa, they said, "You're just a primitive European, you don't know anything." And he said, "I'll show you, I'm going to do something nobody's ever done before." And he basically developed combinatorial logic and the beginnings of computational theory and started producing basically what was a mechanical computer composed of spinning wheels, sliding charts, and a book. And as kind of like the database, if you want to think about it that way. And he went back to North Africa, slid all these things around, and showed people, "Isn't this great? It can answer all your questions about theology." And they did not think it was great. They beat him up with sticks and sent him home on a boat. But he laid down these very kind of important theoretical ideas, which are used even to this day. All right, so technology can kind of be seen as the universal adapter of humanity to the world. It exists to help us, but it can also fit us to the world badly. We make the world, and of course, the world then makes us in turn. And the question is, what do we make the world into, and what does it make us into exactly? And I would say that one of the main things that we really need to try to do is we need to learn how to love our enemies. Once again, as one of the most primary biblical texts, I would say, that is really something that makes Christianity distinct is this idea to love our enemies, because that turns the world upside down. The image in the background here is from the Christmas truce that happened at the start of World War I. They had been fighting each other for a month, and after a month they were sick of it. It was Christmas time, so what do? They go out, they share a smoke with each other, they put up little Christmas trees, they sing songs, and those sorts of things. The officers were very upset that their men did this in lots of places, but it's kind of one of these fascinating historical things that can happen when people are not being forced to be evil to each other. So what does it mean to love our enemies with respect to artificial intelligence? Kind of a really big question, not going to be able to totally answer it here. But one of the things about loving our enemies is that we also try to prevent them from doing evil, because that is an attempt to protect their soul, to ultimately help them become a better person by not permitting them to do evil things. And when we think of what AI can do that is a bad thing, we should also think about how we can stop AI from being used in that way, because ultimately stopping evil not only helps us because we're not victims of it, it also helps the perpetrator or the would-be perpetrator of evil to not be able to do the bad thing that they're intending to do. All right. So we're finally getting kind of close to rounding this up, and then I will be very happy to take some questions. So human intelligence is used for the full spectrum of behaviors from good to evil. AI is also going to be used for the full spectrum of behaviors from good to evil. And we should really think about the power of AI. AI takes things and it makes them so much more efficient. It makes them faster. It makes them at scale. We really need to strongly encourage and promote and facilitate the good uses of AI, and strongly discourage and limit or ban the bad uses, because everything good or bad that humans can do is going to be something that AI can do, but worse, or either much better or much worse. And we can think back to Deuteronomy chapter 30, verse 19. I have set before you life and death, blessings and curses. Choose life so that you and your descendants may live. And so we can ask ourselves, can technology help to restore humanity and religion? How can Christians direct technology towards the better service of humanity? And can we use technology to ultimately enhance our spiritual lives also, and from there to enhance the world? And I think, there are all sorts of apps and things like that that are trying to do this right now. But I think we haven't gone to the next level yet. There is some sort of next level that we can use technology for in terms of strengthening, our own faith and in doing better for the world. And I don't think we're there yet. We're still exploring these things. And really, there's an urgency in the world that we need to get out there and do this faster. So in conclusion, technologies like AI are dual use. They're offering to both help, the ability to both help and harm us. We can work wherever we are, to help guide technology toward its better uses. And I believe that Providence has laid this path out before us. I think that we don't fully appreciate, of course, what God's plan is, because God is a much bigger intelligence than we are. We can only see the little part where we are, but we do have to do our part. If we don't do our part, then it won't get done. So thank you very much. And there's my email address down there if anybody wants to talk to me. I'm also happy to share the PowerPoint slides. If people are interested in those, I'll just turn them into a PDF and send them over to Vesa. And let's see, I can't hear anybody because you're all muted, but I look forward to questions.
So our microphone isn't sensitive enough to pick up the whole side of the room. So if anybody asks a question, maybe Vesa at the front can repeat it. So then
yes,
our online listeners can hear.
Okay, Brian, can you hear us?
Yes, I can hear you.
Okay, so yes, so let's have the questions. And if it isn't audible to you, just say, and I will repeat it to you.
All right, thank you.
Yeah, okay. So Father Peter was first, I think.
It's a simple question. Is it possible for technology to have such catastrophic possibility that it's actually preferable to forego the possible sort of positive elements? Some people talk about sort of maybe it'd be better never to really sort of develop sort of nuclear weaponry, because actually there's that possibility to open up. And is there a point where technology can be so catastrophically bad that actually the prudent thing to do is to forgo the possible benefits?
Okay, did you hear that? Or
I did hear that, yes.
Yes, okay.
So yes, I think you're correct. There are certain types of technology that should not be developed. And we actually see this in the fact that we have international treaties about chemical and biological weapons, right? This is a general thing that humans have discovered with time. Also, I think it's really interesting to know that idea of there being technologies that are intrinsically evil is actually something that comes out of Christian moral theological thought in the Middle Ages. Once again, this idea of intrinsic evil technology, you can find this all the way back in documents in the, let's see, is 11th or 12th century, I can't remember. One of the councils banned bowed weapons, like bows and arrows, crossbows. And you think to yourselves, oh, well, that was a nice try. It didn't work. But they did try. And so this idea of banning certain weapons technologies does go back into Christian history. I think there are certain uses of AI, certain uses of nanotechnology. What it really, I think, becomes really interesting then is the question is not just the use of the technology, but the technology kind of intrinsically itself. Like, is there a good nuclear weapon? Might be one way to look at it, right? Are all nuclear weapons intrinsically evil? I don't think we can classify them as being intrinsically evil, because there might come a day when an asteroid is coming towards the Earth and we need to use a nuclear bomb to attempt to redirect it, for example. But we might be able to say something like any nuclear weapon detonated within the atmosphere of the Earth is an intrinsically evil use of that weapon. If we have some sort of, self-replicating nanotechnology, that would also be something very dangerous. Maybe we want to say experiments like this are not allowed on Earth. And AI is also a really interesting one. I don't think we can say all AI in general is intrinsically evil, but I think we can say that it is certainly a very powerful tool that we need to be very careful with.
Good, can I follow up?
Yeah, sure.
Because it's sort of, I guess, the distinction between sort of AI seems to belong to sort of a slightly different category to nuclear weapons, because it doesn't seem that it in itself is inherently evil. It seems to fit into the category of a very sort of neutral thing, as a sort of a tool that might be used either for good or for bad. But recognizing that, the fact that it has the possibilities to be used so badly, you know, in that case, maybe that's a tool that we shouldn't be developing. I guess this is what I'm trying, rather than saying, I'm not sort of, yeah, so, and to be clear, I'm hoping you're going to help me equip sort of responding to that criticism rather than anything else. But yeah, so it's not about trying to label sort of AI as being inherently evil, but just people think, well, actually, maybe we would still be better off without it. Recognizing that it might be inherently neutral, but because its bad uses could be so bad, it's not worth sort of that development.
Yeah, so this is an interesting point. The first thing I would say is don't call it neutral. I would say call it dual use, which is kind of the terminology that's come up. This is or spectrum use, that there's a very broad spectrum that these technologies can be used for. Sorry, I'm getting a little bit of feedback right now. I'm not sure, maybe that. Okay. Let's see. Oh, there we go. So what I would say is that this is a really interesting point with AI, because we might say that on balance, its bad uses are so bad and its positive uses are not that useful, that it's disproportionately balanced towards bad in terms of its dual use or its full spectrum of uses, and therefore we should stop development of it. This is a genuine question. This is an interesting one. I think we can see this with ChatGPT right now. ChatGPT is highly amusing, right? You can look at it. It creates entertaining things. It can be useful for developing code. There are all sorts of, uses for it that are also pretty useful. At the same time, it's kind of destroyed the educational system. I did a poll of students the other day, and somewhere between 20% and 90% of the students, I asked them, do you think ChatGPT is being used for cheating? Or what percentage of your friends are using ChatGPT for cheating in class? And the low end of the spectrum was 20%, and the high end of the spectrum was 90%. Kids were using these things, and this is college students, so not kids. And we can say to ourselves, maybe, you know what, maybe ChatGPT is not worth it if it's going to result in 90% of students cheating on their classwork or essays or whatever it's being used for. And so if that's the kind of balance we're having to talk about, then maybe it's not worth it. And that's just the beginning, right? More powerful technology is on its way. All right, I cannot hear anything.
Okay, I said, yeah, thank you. Now we're waiting for other questions.
Could I ask a question?
Yes.
So a lot of the research in the kind of EA community done by academics is to do with AI risk, but also they're very interested in AI sentience and population ethics applied to AI. I was just wondering what your take on that was.
Could you give us?
I got some little bits of it, but not all of it, no.
Okay, so basically, Leora was asking for your take on AI sentience and population ethics, because this is something that many people in the EA sphere seem to be thinking about. Yeah,
so this is an interesting question. I am not terribly concerned about AI sentience. I think that has a lot of assumptions that are built into it, which are not necessarily assumptions that we know are possible. I think it's better to think of AI and machine learning and other techniques that are being used in the field as, very advanced statistics, right? And somebody might respond to that saying, well, maybe the human mind is just very advanced statistics also. Nobody understands how the human mind works. Nobody understands how memory works. All these sorts of things that are kind of cognitively inside of us are very complicated, and we do not understand them clearly. So we don't really understand how sentience works, or how we feel anything, or why there are qualia, or all these other philosophical terms that are associated with it. So I think that the question of AI sentience is a little bit too far into the future. Now I might end up, regretting having said that, right? If all of a sudden a computer starts acting sentient at some point, then we'll wish that we had spent more time thinking about it beforehand. But I think that there are enough people working on it right now that I'm not sure we need to put more thought into that space. Maybe we do, maybe we don't. But from my perspective, I don't see that as being a really big risk. I think we should remember that AI is a tool that we've created for specific purposes. And as such, if it starts not doing what we want, then we reprogram it, right? We change the way that it's set up. And also, one other thing to think about on this subject is that when we talk about intelligence, we really need to think about the fact that the human mind has like 100 different kinds of intelligence that have all been shoved into it. And AI really pulls those apart from each other. So it might turn out that sentience or consciousness and mathematical or language ability are all decomposable, right? They're not related to each other. And so when we have a large language model, it might start saying things like, I'm sentient. Hi, my name is Sydney or whatever. Think about Bing Chat that just was doing these sorts of things. And we say to it in response, that's not possible. You're just a statistical language model. You're stringing together words that humans would say if they were in your perspective. Because we never actually built anything into that would reflect sentience or consciousness in any sort of real way. Now, how all those things relate to each other is very unclear. But, last thing I would say is we're running the experiment, so we'll find out how these things actually turn out in the end.
We have a question from Dominic.
Oh, yes, thanks very much. And I wanted to ask about the Tower of Babel. It seems like the ultimate anti-technology passage. In the Bible, you said humans I have 2 or 3 small questions. You said humans wanted to compete with God, but text just says that. So the goal was, let us build this ourselves, city in a tower, and let us make a name for ourselves. So I wasn't sure about the competition with God so much, but then what strikes me about AI is that, God says, okay, look, this is just the beginning. Nothing that they propose to do will now be impossible for them. And this really, brings up the AI question where, nothing will be impossible for us. And then so the first question is, what about the competition with God? And the second question is, if ever there was a technology where the Tower of Babel seems to be a warning against, it seems that the AI. And the third question is, and this seems maybe, I'm not the literalist at all, and so my question is a bit out of place for myself, but I find it strange that it's about God says he disperses the languages, and now AI is bringing humanity together again. I imagine in 20 years, really there will be simultaneous translation if we have enough money for everyone to buy their respective devices, so communication across different languages. We're on the brink after all these hundreds and thousands of years where finally humanity will be able to chat with each other again without any walls between us.
Yes, this is a great question. Is AI the ultimate Tower of Babel technology? And I think you're right there. And the connection to the fact that it's undoing the differences between languages, is this humanity's way of fighting back against the curse of Babel, right? Which is like God cursed us and we'll show you, we'll undo it. I don't think there's also Pentecost, right? And we can think about Pentecost being a gift from God, where they received the gift of being able to speak in all different languages. So there's another interpretation there also that I think it's really the intention that's behind the technology in a lot of these cases, right? Are we intending? Are we coming at this technology with the wrong stance, where we say we're openly opposing God, we're trying to destroy what God has created? Or are we coming at this in a sense of we're really trying to come together as a community and make a better world together? And I think in terms of AI, it very much gets into the use once again. And so the specific use side of it, or the specific use cases, become really important. And this is an ongoing conversation, I would say, in AI ethics, right? Is it about the use of the technology specifically, or is there something intrinsic to the technology itself which is bad? And so this idea of intrinsic evil, like I said, when it comes to nuclear weapons detonated on a planetary surface like the Earth, maybe that's intrinsically evil. But that would be, once again, the context of the use. Whereas if you reclassify a nuclear weapon as a nuclear device and use it to push an asteroid off course in outer space, then that might be a legitimate use of it. And so in that case, nuclear devices would not be intrinsically evil, but nuclear weapons would be intrinsically evil. And you get into these definitional questions, and the definitions include an intention built into them also, which is an important thing to recognize. So when we're talking about AI, it's all these things, but more complicated, because once again, we're taking everything that humans can think of that we can automate and put outside of us. And we're really then evaluating it. Is this part of ourselves, good or bad? And for the most part, these are capacities that can be used for good or bad. They're dual use capacities. And then it's just a matter of automating them and how they end up manifesting in their automated form when they are externalized from us into the world. And I'm sorry, I can't give a good answer, right? This is something that's really interesting to think about. And I love talking about this kind of stuff. And I'm so glad that this is a group of people where we can have this conversation. It's super interesting and also a little bit frightening, right? But also the opportunity there is also a good opportunity, I think.
Yeah, hi, Brian. Thank you. I have a question about AI sentience, going off a trail that was mentioned earlier. So I don't know much about this, but I think the argument for it is something like that if it is true, AI sentience, then these population ethics issues could become like a massive moral consideration. And I think we probably live in a world where no AI is sentient or will ever be. But I could conceive of a world like ours where there could be like non-human, non-animal sentience. Again, I don't think that's very likely at all, but it just seems like possible that could be true. And then if it's possible that that could be true, and that the scale of that would be just massive.
Sorry, you cut out for a second there.
Warrant a certain high level. Okay, if it's possible that could be true and the scale be so massive, wouldn't that warrant a high level of moral consideration? Maybe, you might not take like this consequentialist approach. Maybe you think like it would just be prudent that we act as if that might be the case, just like in other situations where we think there are like very risky situations that might happen, probably won't, but we want to hedge or just be like extra sure in the case that something bad could happen. Anyway, so do you have thoughts on that? How do you approach that?
Yeah, it's an interesting question. That's a good, very logical way of framing it. First thing I would say is I agree with you. I think we live in a world where computer sentience is probably not possible, or at least for the near term, it looks like it's not possible. I'm not going to say about long term, more than 100 years out, but I think in the near term, it looks to me like it's not very likely. However, if you want to, you run the risk, there's a risk equation, risk equals harm times probability. If the harm is really, really high and the probability is really low, then you can still end up with the risk being very high. And so in that way, I think you're right. It is worth a little bit of attention. I'm not sure exactly how much attention it's worth though. And let me put it this way. I'm not sure it needs more attention than it's already getting, I think, which is basically what I said before, right? It's already getting quite a bit of attention. I'm not sure it needs more than that, especially if the probability is actually zero. We don't know if the probability is zero or if it's something like 1 in a million or 1 in a billion or 1 in a trillion or 1 in whatever, right? I'll just say, I'm not, excuse me, I'm not a utilitarian. I'm not a consequentialist. I'm a virtue ethicist. So I do think that the virtue of prudence is very important here, and that consequentialism and utilitarian philosophy are an important component that should be included in the virtue of prudence. So those things are important, but I don't think that they're the only thing that should be considered when it comes to ethical considerations, and also the mathematization of ethics. I don't think that's quite the right way to look at it, because once again, God's logic is love and God's love is logic. There is a way that those two things work together, where we need to consider that, what is the logic of love? It's not necessarily a mathematical logic, right? There's something that's more personal and more direct and more embodied and more connected, or more relational or communal about it. Now, maybe you can start to quantify those things, but we're not quite there yet, I would say.